But thank you very much for coming on a very cold day to the New Cities Movement Futures think tank, which we've been now working on for about 3 years. This is sort of ending my third year on this project, whatever projects, and looking forward to a future. We have a lot of different projects going. A lot of you are aware of some of them anyway. What we are looking at today is the further development of our ideas about an intergenerational community that we have in prospect now here in Lawrence. It's unusual to get all four main institutions in town on the same page. You would think it would be very difficult maybe to get the city and the county. Wasn't so difficult. In fact, in many ways, they led it. The Lawrence Memorial Hospital has been quite interested in the project. I sent you a retrospective a little bit at the last announcement, and I'll send you a vision statement soon. But then Lawrence Memorial Hospital came on and saw this as a key way to deal with a lot of the issues of Obamacare, particularly the issue of recidivism. And we've been talking about a community-based RN nursing program and a health satellite in this community, and the CEO was very interested in that. And then the university, which in some ways is the big 800-pound gorilla in the room, and sometimes it's so complex that, come on in, Forrest, so complex that it's hard to get it on board. Well, Hugh Carter, where are you? Hugh Carter, city commissioner, who's been honchoing this thing, almost, I can hardly keep up with him. He and I and Susan Kemper had yet another meeting with the provost on Monday. We weren't quite sure it was going to happen, but our plan was to say, are you going to do it or not? Before we actually got a chance to do that, he handed over a draft of the affiliation agreements that he is going to implement between KU and New Cities and this community. That meant we had all four on board, which means that we are now heading into our first phase, which will be some financial feasibility studies, will be master planning and some marketing. We've already done some marketing. And if it's a go after that, we, at least for the CCRC part of it, which will be not-for-profit, we will be on the road. With the community that we envision now, we don't know exactly what size, 40 to 80 acres perhaps, $70 million to $100 million perhaps. A lot of that looks like we will have financing for without too much difficulty, but we will have both private investors and not-for-profit builders in this project, which I think is very good. If we have several architects working within design guidelines and within a master plan, and if we have some kind of approval authority that we don't get retrograde architecture, which we cannot have if we're going to look to the future and express a whole new set of values that do no longer stigmatize people of age and no longer separates them from their communities. Indeed, keeps them engaged in a way that will be very important for all of our futures. And as I say to the students, we have to figure out some way to get their resources transferred to you. And that doesn't mean just money, that means experience, that means skill, expertise, that means regular mentoring. There are a whole lots of resources that can be transferred better in an intergenerational setting than in our age-segregated approaches. So we are trying to do something that is not exactly a new idea, but hardly anybody has implemented it. And so that's the contribution we hope to make from our university perspective. We can't just put in the same old windows that we put in and say we've done something that has moved our society along in the right direction. So We have not done this by ourselves. We are, when the turtle is on top of the fence post, she didn't get there by herself, and we didn't get here by ourselves either. We've had many sponsors. Lee Foster has been one of our most loyal people, always here, and helped us get started. And certainly John Gaunt has been critical for this to go on. He's the Dean of Architecture. John is here somewhere in the back. We had Bob Honet, who is the director of the Transportation Research Institute, who, without his help, I would be struggling a lot more than I am. And believe me, it's always a struggle, but that's what makes it fun. But what really makes it fun is for me to see all of your faces from many different universities and perspectives, Kansas City, St. Louis. I'm glad to have you, and we're very happy to have Dr. Philip Stafford today from Indiana University speak to us. Dr. Stafford is the director of the Center on Aging and Community. I'd like to underline community here at Indiana University, and he's been in that position since 2000. He is an anthropologist, a cultural anthropologist. Now, one of the things that we have done that maybe differentiates us from a lot of these initiatives is that we have insisted on being interdisciplinary, because we just knew that this could not be addressed from one perspective, not just from architecture, not just from psychology, not just from any, but a whole group of people coming together. And so we have brought speakers from a lot of different disciplines. And this is our first anthropologist, which I like, because I think anthropology has taught people like Philip how to listen deeply and to hear what people are saying, and to have empathy, and to put himself into other people's shoes, which is a talent that I hope I could learn even better being around him. But he's been in this business a long time. Before he was the director at Indiana, he was the director of senior health services at Bloomington Hospital for 10 years, and before that, coordinator of older adult services, South Central Community Mental Health Center. So he has worked in the medical field as it connects to aging, among other things, and he's very interested in place and placemaking, and the design of space that people can turn into places. Come on in, come on in, come on in. I can move some chairs back here. We have some more. I will tell you a little bit about this space. Everything moves here. All the tables are rollers, all the chairs on rollers. And we call this the most liminal space in the world. We can make it almost anything.
Don't sit behind the
And an old guy like me can actually do it all by himself without any help. So that was one of the geniuses of, I think it was John Shreve, who came up with, let's make it everything movable and flexible, and that's what we've done. But welcome, you latecomers. Anyway, Philip has had a number of awards for exemplary service to medical education. He recently published his last book, Elder Verbia, Aging with a Sense of Place in America, 2009, I guess. It's 3 years old now. He has 4 or 5 other books, including Best Practices, Lessons for Communities in Supporting the Health, Well-Being, and Independence of Older People, and another book, which I like the title, Gray Areas, Ethnographic Encounters with the nursing home culture. Of course, you would expect ethnography from anthropologists. So again, a guy who's listening. In addition to this, 4 pages of articles and presentations, and 3 or 4 pages of grants. So this is a guy who comes all the way from another basketball school, and actually he has told me that Bloomington and Lawrence are almost the same in many, many ways. We're all built on the foundation of limestone, and so we're solid as a rock here up on Mount Oread, and someday we hope to meet you not only here but other places of great interest to us. So Philip, welcome to Kansas, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you,
We
Dennis.
appreciate it. Goodbye.
hospitality that's been provided by Dennis and John Shreve and folks that I've met over the last day or so, and makes me feel real at home. And he's right that parallels between Bloomington and Lawrence are kind of spooky in a way. The only thing we don't have is a School of Architecture in Bloomington, nor much in the way of professional schools. It's all up in Indianapolis and Muncie. And so I'm not sure we could pull off in Bloomington what you're pulling off here. And clearly this is a week with good news, and the news that things are moving forward is really pretty exciting. And I hope in some small way that I can contribute to the discussion. Met yesterday with some students, and we tended to focus on some questions around design and design principles that could be useful to think about in developing a new community, including how does that community attach to the rest of Lawrence, some of those issues as well. I had a little handout that you're welcome to take. There's about maybe 25 of them or so, called Design Guidelines. What is a lifetime community? And in Indiana, we've been using the phrase lifetime community, partly because folks in the disability community want to get involved. They're very interested in livability. And for several years, we talked about elder-friendly communities and then age-friendly communities. Now we're really, because of the potential broadening of interest, we need to frame these issues in a slightly different way. And it means building alliances that didn't exist before. And one of the things you're doing here, which is why I think you'll succeed, is through the efforts of Dennis and all the people involved, you're really breaking down the silos that used to separate people from one another, separate conversations, separate funding streams, separate policies, regulations, and programs. That's a real problem in the field of community development, in my opinion. And so you're really attacking that head on. I think that's very important. I want to start actually with a 4-minute video, and it's called The Big Idea in 4 Minutes. It's a harbinger of a major documentary that's coming out in the fall called Growing Old in an Aging America, I think is the name of the video. It's Vital Pictures. And this little clip is actually on their website now, so you can download it and use it to speak to audiences that you may want to speak to. You can use it as an introduction to why all this work is necessary in the first place. And
never in human history have so many lived so long. Data suggests that if we reach 65 years of age, it's likely we'll live to 85. We're living longer and we're having fewer babies.
The aging society is about the fact that you have larger proportions of people over the age of 60 than you have who are under the age of 15.
And it's not just America that's an aging society. Europe, China, Japan, we're an aging globe. An aging society isn't just about old people. It's not just about baby boomers. Gen X will likely live longer, and so will millennials.
The baby boomers are an introduction to what will be a permanent shift. It is not the pig and the python, the large snake that swallows a pig, and you see that bulge going through the snake and then coming out the other end eventually. Well, ours never comes out the other end. This is a permanent state we're now in a remarkable shift.
And the shift will utterly transform our society. How and how long we work, how and where we live, how we organize our families, medical care, economic and political lives, how we organize our thinking. This will give you an idea of what's ahead. Right now, about half of us live in the suburbs, and it's where 75% of older Americans live and want to continue to live. But suburbs were designed in the 1950s for young families, and the car. There's a disconnect there we have to deal with.
It's an old rule of thumb that if you can make the community work for kids, and if you can make the community work for the elderly, that it will work for everyone else.
Same with how we work. We think of 65 as a retirement age engraved in stone. But when Social Security was enacted in 1935, average life expectancy was only 62, 3 years less than retirement age. Today, we can expect to live about 15 years beyond traditional retirement age.
There isn't anything in the psychology literature that suggests that it's good for people to go on vacation for decades.
Even if it were a good thing, few of us imagine retirement as a vacation anymore. Most of us haven't saved enough, and we're all worried, for good reason, about Social Security and Medicare. What if we reimagined our standard life course? We think of it now in 3 age-segregated boxes. Age 0 to maybe 25, childhood and education. Age 25 to 65, work, and more of it. Raising a family, always crunched for time. Age 65 and beyond, little work, lots of rest. What if we imagined that that third box would start just 3 years before life expectancy today, say around 75, not 65? What if we worked less in the middle of life and longer at the end? And what if we looked at aging and even our own mortality square in the eye?
Children in American society historically have only suffered losses that relate to their parents, for the most part. But today and tomorrow, they're going to suffer the losses of great-grandparents, of parents, of grandparents, and so on.
So here's the point. The world we live in, the people we've become, demographically speaking, are way different from 1935 or 1950 or even 1970. But our institutions, economies, policies, Social Security, Medicare, our communities, work, all were designed for who we were 50 years ago. They don't work for us today. So, are there rough waters ahead?
When we think about an aging society, everybody swoons. Oh my God. You know, they write articles about defusing the demographic time bomb. Why is there an assumption there is no upside?
Maybe because the upside requires change. Change we have to design, legislate, wrap our heads around.
As a psychologist, I'll tell you the very first step that is really essential, and that's that we begin to envision new models, new ways of being, new lives.
How will we come of age in an aging America? The conversation begins.
Suggest that it's good for
You know, they
people.
write articles about defusing the demographic time bomb.
This is a permanent state for now.
We won't worry about it. I don't know if you expected to see Laura Carstensen, her avatar, today, but she was one of the speakers in your original series, and so it's wonderful to have her sort of reappear here in cartoon form. She's a real leader at Stanford Center on Longevity. So we're talking about the demographic imperative, and I know I'm preaching to the choir about this stuff because you're all sort of involved with that. And as Jack Rowe mentioned, you know, we tend to think about that in catastrophic terms too often, but there are lots of opportunities as well in this thing. So it's not a silver tsunami so much as a golden opportunity, if we think of it in that terms. And I think that's what you're doing here in Lawrence, to try to reframe this issue in such a way that it benefits the community. And I think the other important thing, and the reason I call this Places with a Purpose, is because I believe you're not just doing it for the people that are going to live there, but I think when people are put in the right environment, they take care of their place. So it's as much about place as it is about people. The place benefits, I think, when you organize people in a way. She's going to try to fix it for us. That's great.
You can go and keep talking. Don't
Beautiful
let me.
screen. Beautiful screen.
Oh, I think you're going to get it. Yeah, nice. It seems like the little transition things.
It'd be difficult. Thanks.
There we go. I was walking around town the other day, and I don't know if you can see that, Bob, but I came across this. It's an area where there's a lot of construction going on, as you can see, and it's accessed from the CVS parking lot. And if you want to know where the CVS is, it's right across the street from the CVS, because there's two of them. Eventually there'll be a Walgreens on the third corner. Anyway, clearly, you know, the guy that was building the ramp wasn't talking to the guy that was responsible for the utility pole. And that's my silo story that I like to tell as a way of kind of introducing the work that needs to be done and the work that you're doing here to improve your community. And this is one of the big obstacles we have that keeps people from paying attention to this issue. It's our whole sense of that aging is something we need to fight against, that it's a personal struggle. That's the way it's for, all you have to do is turn the TV on, you know, at 6 o'clock at night and see ad after ad after ad for this or that nostrum or cream or whatever it might be, which is fueling this huge anti-aging medicine thing. I hate that phrase. If you Google on anti-aging medicine, you'll get millions of hits. It's unbelievable. So this is something that we need to keep in mind because there's a lot of that out there, particularly in terms of the public discourse about this stuff. It's part of that catastrophic message about aging that I was referring to. The other thing is that we put a great emphasis on aging as something that has to do with the individual body. When you talk to people about aging, that's kind of where the conversation goes, to our individual bodies, as if that's what aging we're all about, you know, the physiology of growing old. Moreover, when we deal with that body, we tend to fragment it. So if you look at the way medicine has sort of dealt with not just older people, but people of all ages, we tend to break the body up into parts. And we have one specialty for one part and one specialty for another part. And we sort of lose track. So not only are we obsessed with aging as being about the body, it's a body that we fragment when we talk about it and try to address what it's all about. By the same token, we've fragmented our communities. So I think there's probably something that undergirds all of this that's going on that's common to the fragmentation of our communities and the fragmentation of the body in medicine. You know, through zoning that started in the late 40s and on into the 50s and 60s, we separate pieces of the community from each other. We separate work from play, from school, from shopping, and we put them in different parts of the community. We break the community up by use or by function. That's the way that we have zoned much of this country. Obviously it's a suburban pattern. It's not an urban solution. It's a suburban pattern, and as the video mentioned, more older people live in suburbs now than in cities and towns combined. And older people have and can, and one would argue, may suffer from being caught in this kind of an environment. They may have very well grown old there, but as you may have heard before, sometimes they're referred to as Peter Pan environments because they were built as if nobody would ever grow old there. There's no real street pattern that allows for public transportation that really penetrates the community. There's no shopping, there's no school. It's just residential, single-family residential, often mostly young families. But as I say, a heavy number of older people are living in suburbs, including baby boomers. Baby boomers have already sort of moved to the suburbs themselves. According to William Fry from the Brookings Institution. So this is kind of an issue that as a society we have to address as well. How are we going to retrofit communities? I have really come to believe I got interested in old people when I was in junior high school. I used to take my tape recorder around the neighborhood and interview old people. And that was on the back burner for a few years until I got back into graduate school and thought that was really interesting stuff. And me, we're talking about 55 or 75 or 95, when is aging? And I think that's the wrong question. I don't think we should be asking that question. I think we need to be asking, where is aging? What's the relationship between aging and place? When I was at the hospital, you know, being a cultural anthropologist working in clinical settings, my orientation was always towards the community-based side of things, trying to overcome the clinical biases, if you will, that made it difficult to serve older people where they lived, in their homes and in other places. People pretty much still have to come to the clinic, and I mean clinic in the broadest sense, to receive health care. And I always felt that was a problem, and one of those silos, that I was talking about. But we used to bring older people into the hospital for focus groups, and we'd ask the question, well, what do you want the healthcare system to do for you? And invariably, this is kind of a response we would get. I'd like it to help me manage at home as long as I can. So older people themselves were aware and expressed this identity between the concepts of health on the one hand and the concept of home on the other hand. For them, there was an identity there. It's not reflected in the systems we've built. We have a housing system over here, we have a healthcare system over here, and they're not very well integrated. Almost never the twain shall meet these days. So we thought it would begin to, because this was important for older people that we were talking to, we felt it was important to understand what is meant by home. What's this concept all about? Because it seems pretty important. I'm not going to go there without another thought. But. So the task became to understand, well, what is home for older people? And this is a minimalist definition of home from Robert Frost. Home is where when you get there, they have to take you in. So I think we can do better than that. Our goal should be somewhat better than that. We still do that, for some populations, but I think that's the floor, if you will, that we need to build on that. What I think we need is what I call a deep map of home. And I actually got that phrase from William Least Heat Moon and his book Prairie Earth, which is an incredible 900-page tome on Chase County, Kansas. It's a deep map of Chase County, and it's a wonderful book if you haven't read it. It's incredible. And he calls it a deep map. So that's kind of where I was coming from in terms of thinking of how can we create a deep map of home and really explore the conceptual and emotional, experiential underpinnings of that experience. I like to tell a story about a woman named Opal. That's not her real name, but she was one of the people that we were involved with in our ethnographic research in Bloomington. She lived near the hospital in one of these little bungalows, which are pretty typical in Bloomington and in a lot of communities. I've seen many here in Kansas City as well. I mean in Lawrence. But it's kind of a long lot, front porch, up close to the sidewalk with a front porch. When you went through her front door, you were immediately in her living room. And this is where her control center was. This is a notion familiar to Keith. Her lazy boy chair, tray tables on each side of her chair. This is like her cockpit, And she had her telephone on one table, and on the other table she had all these white cards that were about like this, and all her phone numbers were on these cards, and these were the lids from her Meals on Wheels containers. And she had a black magic marker, and so because she didn't see very well, she could write all her friends' phone numbers in large print and keep them on these cards, and she'd shuffle through the cards until she got to a friend that she wanted to talk to and dial her number. At night, if you can believe this, she would sort of use her tray table as a kind of a walker, which is kind of scary, but take it into the bedroom that had stuff that she needed on it, and she'd lie in bed, she had a phone there too, and she'd talk to her friends at night and listen to Christian radio, and so she was pretty well adapted, but she was getting more frail. Her front porch was lined with flowers and plants that she loved to take care of. And she was having some difficulty because the kitchen in her house was all the way in the back. And it was hard for her to fill her plastic jugs in the back and bring them all the way up to the front porch. Well, one day, a young couple moved in across the street. And she was aware that somebody new was living there. And so when their car would pull into the driveway, she would go out onto her front porch and just sort of piddle around, make herself visible and available, And sure enough, the young couple came across and introduced themselves to her. And before long, they had worked out a signaling system with her porch light, so that if she needed some assistance, you know, they would work, her porch light would on or off, I can't remember. They worked out an arrangement whereby when her water jugs got empty, she would put them up on the banister of the porch. And when the neighbors saw the jugs were on the banister, they'd come over, they'd take the jugs back to the kitchen, fill them with water, and bring them back out into the front porch for her. And I like to think of this as a classic win-win situation. Really, it's win-win-win. The young couple got to meet and got to know a neat old lady. She got to enjoy the company of a new young couple. And as a matter of fact, the guy was an EMT at the hospital. So how cool is that? You know, I got an emergency responder that lives across the street. It was a win for the neighborhood, because people that walked by her front porch could still see the flowers and the plants, and she contributed to the whole aesthetic of the neighborhood, and created beauty, which was important for her. And of course, it kept her busy and fed her own sense of self and who she was. So it was a great example of sort of, you know, win-win situations. Didn't take a grant. It didn't take a new service. It didn't take a case manager. Really, all it took were the natural qualities of the environment itself and the ability to dwell, if you will. It was important that she was savvy enough to go out on the porch and be seen by her neighbors to make herself visible, because she knew that would sort of prompt a response. But if her house had been set back and you walked along the sidewalk and you couldn't communicate with her, if she didn't have a front porch, you can see the consequences of that. If she were afraid to come out onto her front porch for fear of a drive-by shooting, which is a reality for a lot of elderly people around the country these days, and you know very well now with all the news that we hear that's a reality for people. Or if she had come out and would be able to look around and not see anything beautiful, just see trash or a burnout lot next door or whatever it might be, she may never come out on that front porch, and that relationship may never have developed. So when I tell this story, it always sort of, and this is a true story, it always reminds me of the significance of this relationship and how place becomes so important in people's welfare, and that the physical environment is important, but how we dwell is also important. And she's a good role model. So we came to the conclusion that home is really a pretty deep concept. As you know, a home is and I don't necessarily mean this in terms of the house. I'll get to that, but a home is a repository of meaning. And I've met women who've lived in their homes for as long as 75 years, and you can imagine living in one place for 75 years, the sedimentation of meaning that accumulates over time, and sort of to do an archaeology of that house means peeling back decades. But as you walk through the house, you're constantly reminded of your own history, the history of your family, the dents in the woodwork where the kid in the stroller, hit the woodwork, or maybe the notches on the threshold where you mark the growth of your children, on the door jamb, the pictures of this event or that event. So when you walk through the house, it reminds you who you are. It sustains your sense of self, and connects you with your own past. So it can be a deep repository of meaning. That can be as true of the neighborhood as of the house, I should say. Home is a financial cushion, and I really mean this in a practical sense. As you know, home ownership rates among older people are pretty high. I think nationally it's 85% maybe. Not as high in highly urban areas, but most older people, have got some equity to work with. And you don't want to mess around with that equity. Particularly if you're only on Social Security, you don't have much income, but you've got some equity in your house. It becomes a really critical issue for your financial welfare. Or you may be concerned about your legacy and not want to use that equity because of your desire to give a legacy to your family. So home is a financial cushion. Your home is a power base. When people come to your home, they're in your turf. And you get to sort of decide who gets in and who doesn't. So that's your sort of your base of power and influence is where you are, and that can be important. People in nursing homes and in assisted living, I have to say, sometimes are not able to control who comes into their room, into their space. Home is, there's an aesthetic that we cultivate, with our homes. And this is especially true of Opal, that, her aesthetic, her selection of flowers and plants and so forth was an important part of her aesthetic. Women who arrange and decorate their homes, men who work on their workshops. It's all about, developing a kind of a personal aesthetic and liking the way things look. And if you've got somebody, a contractor coming in to change the way your bathroom looks, put in a grab bar that's shiny metal, or a toilet that looks strange, or a different kind of a shower, you're kind of changing the way things look, and so it requires some adaptation. We have to be sensitive about those kinds of things. Home is a practical support, and I really mean this in a literal way. If you've lived in a place a long time, it's like a hand in a glove. And you remember when you were kids and you would close your eyes and try to walk through your house or apartment just for the fun of it, see if you would bump into anything. Well, that's kind of the experience. After you've been in a place for a while, you can close your eyes and walk through it, and it's that familiar to you. I've known older people who arrange the furniture in their house so that it provides them places to rest on the way to the bathroom. So you put your hand on the couch here, and then you go over here, and you're working your way to the bathroom. So literally, can be a practical support for people to manage their daily life. When you're in a home, and particularly in a neighborhood or a social environment, you are at the node in a social network. So you have a set of connections with people around you. In short, home is not a noun, it's a verb. In other words, what's important is the homemaking and not the home. So I like to think of it as a verb and not a noun. Ulysses S. Grant, this is tangential, and I don't know why I remember this, but Ulysses S. Grant, his last words were, "I think I am a verb." You have to kind of think about that a minute, but then you understand what he's talking about is this is what we all are. We're verbs, and we're not an entity. We're a process. We're an activity, and I like to think of home in that sense, as a dynamic, if you will. So home is a deep concept. Unfortunately, we've got sort of, as I said, home over here, and we have a kind of a clinical perspective on health over on the other side. A clinical perspective on the health and welfare of older adults reimburses for acute care. There's a kind of a disease model that we have of old age. Our focus is on longevity and anti-aging medicine, how long you can live. Our focus is on disease research, and over the last 20, 25 years, at places like NIH, increasingly people have had to write grants around specific diseases as opposed to the basic biology of aging. Meredith Winkler has written about that. Our orientation in a clinical perspective is towards cure. Our approaches are reactive and corrective. We put a lot of stock in diagnosis. We see people as patients, and we see as what we're doing as delivering services. So that's kind of a clinical perspective on home, on the health of older people. If we were trying to incorporate this notion of home and community into the way we think about health and healthcare for older people, I think we'd see a different sort of constellation of responses. We'd see better reimbursement for chronic care. We'd see aging not as a disease, but as a natural entropic process. It's not something that just old people do, it's something we all do, if we're lucky enough. The focus is on the quality of remaining years rather than on longevity. Focus on the basic biology of aging as opposed to disease. Focus on care rather than cure. Our approach is preventive. We focus more on function than we do on diagnosis. And we see the person as a community member and secondarily as a patient. And what we do is community building, not deliver services. So this is what I would claim should be the elements of a system of healthcare that kind of focuses on reframes the way we think about older people. So the anti-aging stuff has to go in the trash can, or the recycling bin, I should say. I think what we're talking about here is my health, and see where these two things can come together. And for that purpose, I have another story about a guy that I came to know and enjoy. He's passed on. He's not Albert Einstein, but he looked a lot like that. And I don't have a picture of Milton that I could find recently, so I use Albert Einstein as Milton's avatar. Okay, but his name is Milton, and he moved to Bloomington. He died about 5 years ago. He moved about 5 years before that. He moved to Bloomington in his late 70s. His daughter lived there, and he bought a little bungalow. I was thinking maybe I had a picture of it. I think I do, but bought a little bungalow in a close-in neighborhood, and opened up what he called the Barefoot Museum. And there's a story behind that, because a few years earlier, his wife developed cancer, and the two of them, lock, stock, and barrel, moved to Sri Lanka. Used their Social Security money to buy this sort of gigantic house, with people that could hire to help them, and students that were hostelry type students would come through the house and spend a few days or a few weeks with them, and it was just like this open environment. And so he's a pretty creative guy, and he was a painter, and this is one of his paintings here. He's what you call an outsider artist, I think. He's sold a couple of paintings, but most of his hundreds of paintings, I don't know where they are now. I have one that he gave to me, but I think the rest of them maybe are in that recycling bin, I'm not sure. But anyway, he had an interesting method he used, and I forget what he called it, but he would take off all his clothes, okay, go into his bedroom and shut the door and all the windows, put shades on the windows so it would be as dark as he could possibly get it. And he would sit there and meditate on the floor. He spent a lot of time on the floor, which was really good for his range of motion. Spent a lot of time on the floor. He'd meditate until he had some kind of a vision. And if that happened, then he would wake up and go to a piece of paper. He used cellophane dipped in paint and a lot of different techniques, and create these images of what he had imagined when he was in that state. So he's an interesting guy, and he had a sign on his house, and occasionally people would drop by, and at one time there was I think an article in the New York Times about him. He used to write a lot of letters to the editor of the New York Times. This is the house that he lived in on the Rogers Street in Bloomington. This is where I go from truth to fable, and so I want to point that out. Everything I've told you up to this point is true. Now it becomes sort of apocryphal, I guess. But Milton was he was a pretty smart guy, and this is just as true. He would the hospital was a couple blocks down the hill, and at lunchtime he would walk down the hill to the hospital cafeteria, which was a great place to eat because the food was cheap and it was always healthy. And he would sit in the cafeteria, and the hospital employees sort of gravitated to him. And so he'd end up with 3 or 4 hospital employees talking with him at lunch. And this is a really good thing if you plan on going into the hospital at some point and everybody knows you and likes you, finds you an interesting person. So that was a pretty good deal. And but one day he was kind of leaving his house, and there were trucks going by on the hill, and he kind of turned this way because he couldn't hear a truck coming, and turned this way, and his hip fractured, and then he fell which is often, as I understand, we have an occupational therapist in here. Yeah, that sometimes the break occurs before the fall. And so somebody got him, they saw he'd fallen, they took him to the hospital, and he went in and had his hip fracture repaired. Then he went into long-term care for a couple of months, and eventually came back home, like $40,000 later, without hearing aids. Because Medicare doesn't pay for hearing aids. Because normal age-associated hearing loss, called presbycusis, is taken to be a normal part of aging and not a pathology. And Medicare pays for disease care, illness care. It doesn't pay for sort of normal age-related kinds of decrements, okay? So, and hearing aids are not cheap, and you have to buy batteries, and you have to learn how to use them. A lot of them end up in the dresser drawer, and they don't do real well there. So it shows you how our reimbursement system is pretty skewed, and that if we oriented towards function and away from diagnosis, things would look a lot different. And we may not have ended up paying $40,000 to repair, his hip. So the point is, and this is a quote taken from a very seminal article in the field of disabilities. Health and disability refer to the balance between personal capability and environmental demand. It's or aspirations. That's my addition. What we're talking about is, in a sense, taking illness, disease, disability out of the body, and looking at aging and disability as a relationship between the body and the environment. So that's where it exists. That's where it exists. It's not in the body, it's in our relationship with our environment. That's where disability lies, and in many ways that's where aging lies. If you're in a wheelchair, you come up to the old Carnegie Library and there's a set of steps there. You wanted to go in and read to a child, but you can't do that because of the steps. You're disabled, right? If there's a ramp there and you go on in, who's to say where the disability is? It's in that relationship between the person's capability and the qualities of the environment. That's what causes the disability. So we distinguish between impairments and disabilities. It also moves this discussion away from disabled people and moves it towards disabling environments. So that's the kind of discussion that it leads us to. And as you can see, it also politicizes the whole notion of disability, doesn't it? And aging and illness. So it's an important shift. We have a lot to learn from the disability community relative to that way of thinking. Wendell Berry, my favorite author, says it much more eloquently. He says, community is the smallest unit of health. Community is the smallest unit of health. And again, I find that a sensitizing concept when you think about it, because it suggests that health is not about the body, it's about our community, where we are in our community, and how we fit with our community, what we do for our community, what our community does for us, what we do with our community. That's what health is all about. What does that mean about the work we do here in this room and elsewhere? It suggests that the work we do should be involved with creating good places to grow up and grow old. What in Indiana we've been calling livable lifetime communities. That's sort of the nature of the work that's required. So it's not so much about services, it's about kind of community building. I think that's in many ways what brings you here to this project. That's not a very good slide. I used the little shapes thing that you have in Word, and they have one of these, but you can't make the type any larger than that, or at least I couldn't figure out how to do it. But the point is, it's not just the house, but that we also need a broader concept of home. You've got the house and the apartment or whatever it might be, but then you've got the yard. And the yard is very significant to people. When we interviewed people in Bloomington, pretty extensively, we said, where do you interact with your neighbors? In your house or in their house? And 70% responded neither. We meet in the interstitial spaces, what this Swedish guy calls the space between buildings. I can't remember the name. Somebody will probably know him. He's a Swedish urban planner. But that's where all the action was. The proverbial back fence, the clothesline, the mailbox, the front porch. So, in terms of community building, if we can just get people out of their houses, even if it's in the proximate environment, we're going a long ways to facilitate interaction. It makes you consider who those people are as well that might be available to an older person. If they're in a seniors only environment, they may go into the proximate environment and only have other old people to talk to. So it makes us to think about how we people, environments and what we can do to create opportunities for spontaneous interaction across various ages. So the yard was important, if you will. Sometimes that's formally defined. In terms of people's experience, it tends to be more informally defined. It has some felt meaning as a place with a history and, those kinds of things. But the neighborhood is an important place for identity, a place for interaction, a place to access services, ideally. That's really important to talk about as a community. And then the fourth one is the community at large. In Bloomington, and we interviewed a lot of older people, they really identified with Bloomington. And often Indiana University was mentioned, even people who had no connection with Indiana University. We asked them to talk about Bloomington and what was about Bloomington and what was Bloomington about, and they would often mention Indiana University. So that became part of their identity with respect to their participation in a community. That was important as well. Now, we have built environments where all this stuff is in place. That's not a great slide, but I just pulled it off a website for us, CCRC. And it's got everything you need. It has individual cottages, it has long-term care facility, it has a wellness center and a community center. And so it's got all that stuff in place, which is a good thing, because often that's what people are looking for. Where's my quote? But there's some drawbacks in some cases. One of the drawbacks is if you provide all that stuff to people, how are they going to pay for it? Well, it goes into their rent. And you're not just paying for residents, you're paying for a chapel, you're paying for a restaurant, you're paying for a bank, you're paying for wellness services, you're paying for an activity program. And so that, in a sense, those costs are rolled in. So these forms of support tend to be kind of expensive. A lot of people are priced out of this kind of living opportunity. And as you know, some of them are gated. A friend of mine, Kristen Bodiford, who has an article coming out I'll have to try to remember that, but she has a quote from a woman that she knew when she was talking to somebody about this stuff. The woman's name was Anne. And Anne said, "I live in a gated senior community with all the amenities one could dream of, workshops, handicrafts, exercise, etc. You name it, we have it. And yet I'm longing to walk to the corner coffee shop, to hear the sound of children playing, dogs barking. I want to eat at the corner cafe, see young people in love, walk to the library, catch the train into the city, watch mothers with their children in the park, young families, teenies in the latest, wildest outfit. Yes, I'm lucky to have what I do, and I never forget that, but I am excluded from the mainstream of life. Please consider in your conversations that there are many of us who do not want to be maintained. We want to belong, not only to each other, with whom we may have only one common denominator, age, but to society. We want to be just like everyone else. Think about building communities that are whole. We need each other. We can learn to care about each other, support the young and the old, give what we have the energy to do, not what society has assigned to us. Instead of a multi-million-dollar resort where every need is met and everything is planned for the generic aging American, think up something daring, something challenging, something creative. And that's a wonderful quote for this group and the kind of work that you're doing. already, which is to try to infuse this whole conversation with energy and creativity and kind of a lifespan perspective as well. And so really I admire what you're doing. Several years ago, we had a project called the Advantage Initiative. We wanted to develop a survey that communities could use to measure how elder-friendly they were. And before we developed the survey, we went around to 4 or 5 different cities around the country. We went to Allentown and Long Beach and I think Raleigh and Chicago. And we asked the focus group participants, which were older people of a variety of different ages and community leaders, to come to the focus group, but bring a collage or a poster with you that signifies what you think is an elder-friendly community. Which was a fun thing. People really got into this. And as you can see, this is the kind of thing we got, which is the woman put a lot of work into this, this collage, cutting out paper and labeling things. And this was her idea for an elder-friendly community. And this is a woman in her late 70s in Chicago. And you can see she has a kind of a new urban, neo-traditional kind of model here with a town center with a green space in the middle. Now, in Indiana, it would have a courthouse, in the middle. It wouldn't be just all green. But there's green space with benches, and then basic services. Right around the center of the village, there's a grocery store, there's a library, there's a fitness facility, there's a swimming pool. And then there's a road for service vehicles, but the general traffic is sort of relegated to the exterior. So there's some automobile traffic or truck traffic, but it's just for servicing the community. And then there are these little things scattered throughout the community that sometimes people say, are those tombstones? And I say, no, they're not, but I also believe a good community has a good cemetery. I believe that's an important feature of a good community. Those are cottages, essentially, single couple cottages, those kinds of things. And there's congregate housing as well. The larger building is congregate living. So I thought that was pretty innovative and pretty creative way to think about this stuff. What we did was use the surveys to, we used focus groups to identify what we call 4 domains of an age-friendly community. And we developed a survey that would measure individual responses around these 4 domains. Basic needs.
On the back page of your handout.
Oh, is it? Yeah, that's right. Thank you very much. Basic needs, physical and mental health and well-being, social and civic engagement, and independence for the frail and people with disabilities. So we developed this survey around these 4 domains, and it's been conducted in like 30 different cities around the country, and lately we've been doing an online version of it. There are lots of people these days talking about livable communities for older adults. And the Advantage Initiative, which is one of what are now multiple initiatives around the country, age-friendly community initiatives. AARP, as you may very well know, has been involved with livable communities now for several years. The AARP definition of a livable community is that it has accessible building design, of course. It has shopping within close proximity, especially drugstores, groceries, and hospitals. There are recreation opportunities, safe, well-designed sidewalks, and complete streets. I'm guessing that everybody here knows what a complete street is. Is there anybody that would be willing to say no? Well, it's a street that is serves multimodal forms of getting around. Here's the guy over here who knows about complete streets. It's built. Most of our streets are just built for cars. Sometimes buses. Sometimes sidewalks, on the side. Rarely bike lanes. They're rarely totally complete and serve all forms of movement. So that's essentially the purpose behind a complete street, is that no matter how you want to get to somewhere, this public good serves you, and it's not targeted towards the automobile. So it's an issue of equity too when you think about it. A lot of communities, including Lawrence, as I understand now, have complete street ordinances. So when a new street's going in, or there's been the money spending on a street, that they have to begin to try to approach that design and that concept. Now, the American Institute of Architecture also has come up with a list describing livable communities without any reference to age. in their description. And this, I got this maybe 5 or 6 years ago, maybe it's changed now, but design on a human scale, provide an environment that provides choices for people. I'd like to tell a story about that, and I may have told it yesterday to somebody, so I apologize for repeating it. But one of the women that we came to know in our research was an older woman who lived across the street from the community center, which had been originally the colored school in Bloomington up until about 1955, and then became a community center. She lived across the street, a house with a front porch right close to the sidewalk. She was an historical icon in this community, so she had lots of people looking out for her. And she explained to us that she liked to go to the community center, and there were steps in the front, and there was an elevator and a ramp around the side. And she said, on some days, I like to use the steps. On other days, I don't feel up to it, and I'll go around the side and use the ramp and the elevator. So a wonderful example of an environment that provides choice, and is also accommodates the individual vicissitudes of daily life that older people is the experience of old age. You feel good one day, you don't feel quite so good the next day. And we talk about chronic illness as if it were some kind of a continuous, homogeneous, status over months or years, as if it were like the same over a period of 3 months or 3 years. When in fact there's a tremendous amount of flux if you have a chronic illness. And again, you can imagine we could overbuild and create environments that foster dependency by being too easy to navigate, or we can environments that also incorporate some challenges. Because what people like is overcoming the challenge. We don't want to overwhelm people with the demands of the physical environment, but we want an environment that's challenging enough that when you feel like it, you can challenge yourself, and when you accomplish it, you feel good. And in many ways, that's great because it kind of moves you up to another level of homeostasis, a little higher level of function, if you will, because of you're successfully meeting those challenges. Elizabeth did another thing that I think exhibited that. She had one of these chairs with an electric plug that lifts you out. You've seen them advertised on TV, where Medicare will certainly pay for this. And people buy these things, and you push a button and the chair lifts up and you can walk away. And for some people, it's wonderful. But she had one of these chairs, her family gave her, and she pulled the plug because she did not want to become dependent on this chair. So she just pulled the darn plug out of the thing. And in her kitchen, she arranged her kitchen in such a way that the Tupperware stuff was just out of her reach. So that when she wanted the plastic stuff that wouldn't break, she had to extend her range of motion a little bit and just take a little more to get what she needed. The stuff that was breakable, she put down here because there was stuff in the kitchen she didn't want to break, so she would make that easy to get to. So just in her daily life, she sort of challenged her and created a place. That's what I call dwelling, and that's how people sort of fit themselves to places. Mixed use development, of course, is extremely important. Preserving urban centers, creating vibrant public spaces, protecting environmental resources, conserving landscapes, and the principle that design matters. That's one that everybody in the School of Architecture wants to hear. So those are from the AIA, Livable Community. It says nothing about old age, says nothing about disability. That's just a livable community. And that means that if you're working on aging issues, you've got a lot of allies in the environmental movement, in the disability community, in people that want the community to be more kid-friendly. And some new coalitions, can emerge from these kinds of realizations. This is Kendallville, Indiana. I have a friend who's an architect in Fort Wayne who's been doing some kind of thought experiments in Kendallville. It's a small town. It's about 6,000 people, maybe 7,000. It's got some nice preserved Main Street fabric that they haven't schlocked up. Some great, beautiful buildings on Main Street. And as you can see, relatively dense downtown area. Well, this guy, Zach, has done a lot of work with CCRCs over the years. And what he did was take a map of a CCRC and overlay it to the downtown of Kendallville. And you can see really how expansive this is. And you have to follow the streets and sidewalks to get to the dining room. So if you live here, you can't just sort of walk across to the dining room that way. You've got to go all the way around here. So it's like, walking fairly long distance. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing for people. But we have this assumption sometimes that this is a different form, that things are easy for people, when in fact, the pattern in some ways is one that's familiar to us from downtowns all over the country that we already have in place. So one of the things that Zach is doing is working on how to retrofit these downtown communities to bring in the supportive services, and talking to long-term care providers about doing that, but sort of delivering these services outside of the traditional facility into existing neighborhoods to provide supports for people through changes in the built environment, through service delivery systems, creating new kinds of living options, housing options for people. They want to do work-live type space for older entrepreneurs who can work downtown, have a desk and an incubator, maybe mentor a younger person who's trying to start a business, those kinds of things. So it's a lot of interesting things that he's talking about. Develop CCRCs because of the incredible range of knowledge that people have in that industry, and the skills and the resources, and perhaps some of the capital that's in the long-term care industry that can be transformed to this. Now, I think we also need new communities. I think in many ways, because of the demographics, that's never going to meet the full need, and sometimes there are reasons for not doing that because of the costs that may be associated with it. I think we need new communities too, and my comment yesterday was, if we're building new communities, let's make them as contiguous as we can to the existing communities, so that we can fill in the spaces and create kind of a continuous fabric of occupation, and integrate a new community with the Main Street community. And so that's an interesting design question that I think maybe people are going to be working on. What does it all mean in practical terms? Well, I think we'll see new housing options, including aging in place. I think we'll see a development of new housing options. We'll see the development of new mobility options. I was telling, it's Bob, right? Telling Bob about our golf cart ordinance in Indiana. We had seniors in some small towns taking up golf carts to get around, and the state police kept arresting people because it was illegal to be out on the streets. And so the state General Assembly, in response to some mayors, said, okay, we're going to develop a piece of state legislation that would enable local municipalities to develop golf cart ordinances. So if you want to do that, you can. And a large handful of communities in Indiana now have developed ordinances around the use of golf carts. And what they're doing is regulating it and permitting it. But in one little town that I've worked with, this town of about 5,000, the mayor, who was kind of ambivalent about it at first, was finally convinced. The city council passed a golf cart ordinance, and within the first 3 months, they had like 75 golf carts permitted or something like that. So there was kind of a pent-up demand, and I think there are probably other communities around the country where that's not thought of as a mobility option. And I think some new things may come out of that use of low-speed vehicles by older adults, in the way of what complete streets need to look like, what trails projects need to look like, what's the etiquette of use around those kinds of things. I was telling a story about the resistance to the golf cart ordinance because Linton has the largest 4th of July parade in Indiana, and people were taking their golf carts to the parade and going right up to the curb, which takes a space for about 3 people, and just making a lot of people angry because they were, preventing them from seeing the parade. So one of the things that the community had to do was sort of overcome some of that resistance to golf carts. And I don't know, I can't describe what the etiquette of golf cart use is in Linton, Indiana now, but maybe they need to go down to villages in Florida or something to see, how it's supposed to work. But it's an alternative to the car. It's a low-cost alternative to the car. I was telling one woman who's really into physical activity and aging, she said, well, that's just not good because people should be walking, not using an electric slow-speed vehicle. And I think there's some truth to that, but we need all these options. That's the issue of choice in public policy. And then new choices in healthcare. I think it's not my specialty area, but I think that's something we'll start to see. And I know you've got that whole area represented well in this coalition that you're developing here. And what's going to be interesting are the conversations that occur between people who are involved with healthcare, the people who are involved with mobility, the people that are involved with housing. It's those sort of cross-boundary conversations that I think you're going to find very interesting and will be very exciting and watched, by the rest of the country. And of course, what's going to require, I always come back to this, it requires breaking down silos and crossing boundaries. And Dennis and I were talking the other day about that's what anthropologists do. I mean, we're all about boundaries. Going across a boundary, trying to understand what's going on the other side, and then sort of bringing that information to inform what we do on this side. And sort of trying to bring the two sides together in some ways, finding looking at the boundary itself, which is often where a lot of the action is. And but we have to realize that where we locate housing is a transportation question. For plan commissions, they have to understand that housing and transportation cannot be discussed as separate issues in a community. Same thing for healthcare and education at all levels. Where we locate elementary schools, we have done with elementary schools what we've done with a lot of senior housing, which is put them way out in the green field, in the cornfield. It's the same kind of thinking. With commerce, with faith communities. We see the same thing in our area, you probably do here too, with churches, mega churches that have to go pretty far out to get the kind of parking they need to get the census they want, on Sundays. It's the same thing at work. So a lot of it's about land use planning and being more rational, more deliberate, more intentional about the way as a community we sort of occupy the land. And if we do it well, then as I said to begin with, I think the land benefits, the place benefits. And that's as much an important reason for doing this work as is the conversations we have about the welfare of older people. Another really key element, in my opinion, about community change and community planning is this whole notion of participation. That you really need to spend a lot of time identifying the stakeholders around a particular issue. Do that deliberately and intentionally. And then have a plan for how you're going to engage each of those stakeholders. They're not all engaged in the same way, but that's part of your participation plan. And you have to be really creative with people who've typically not been engaged in, civically engaged in this fashion. You have to address people with different literacy capabilities. You have to address people who don't want to go down to the city council and stand in front of a podium and talk to a group of sober-looking people about what you think for 4 minutes. That excludes a lot of people. Children, what do we do to listen to children seriously about the quality of our environments? When we were working in Bloomington, we spent some time asking children about what old people need. What should our community be for old people? And they had some really good insights. We tend to think of old people as the experts on all this stuff, but that's not true. This is my favorite definition of participation. Participation provides a collaborative process by which community inhabitants reach common goals, engage in collective decisions, and create places. And these places, in turn, serve as material expressions of their collective efforts. And I like it because it's a place-based definition of participation. And it all comes down to a couple of basic design principles. And this is one offered by Christopher Alexander, who a lot of you in the audience will know. And it's in a book about this thick that's pretty dry reading, really. It's just a set of principles. But this is my favorite. If we could just accomplish this in our communities, we would be doing very well, I think. And I would love to live in a community where there are old people everywhere. So no matter where you go, it's possible you'll run into an old person. I mean, what a wonderful community that would be. There's another one, though, that I think is as important. And this person is also well known for different reasons, but you remember Cat Stevens, the singer? Well, his name now is Yusef Islam, but this is what his principle was. Where do the children play? And wonderful song. And another really important design principle. No matter where you go, we should be able to answer that question. Where do the children play? you know, when you walk through campus, can you answer that question? I don't think so. I don't know, maybe you've done a good job of incorporating playgrounds or pocket parks or programming or whatever you do so that you see people below your own waist height on campus. So we're in a kind of an artificial environment here. It's really not an intergenerational environment, except the generations further up, perhaps. There's your generation, and then there's Dennis's generation. No, I'm just kidding. Because we're in the same generation. So anyway, those are the two design principles I wanted to leave you with as you think about this work. And this is my shameless plug. I do a blog. It's called Phil's Adventures in Elderburbia. I'm not good about doing it more than once a month. And I usually bring a couple of extra books to sell. I have 2 copies of Elderburbia left and 1 copy of Gray Areas. And what I do is just buy them from the press, and then I just sell them at cost. So they're just discounted to what I pay for them. So we have a website also called lifetimecommunities.org. It's kind of Indiana specific, but it kind of gives you an idea of what we're trying to do in Indiana. And that's the end of my presentation. And I don't know how
fairly newly constructed Center for Independent Living for Seniors. And I'm learning that there are thousands of these places across the country, and there may be hundreds or thousands more in the development stage, kind of a cookie cutter model, at least architecturally. Where does all of that fit into the process that you're engaged in?
Well, I think when we go out 20 years and we look back, we'll see that maybe this was a threshold of some kind, where we were getting away from that. I think we'll grow out of it, so to speak. I don't mean that in a negative way, but I think new models will emerge. You know, the kind of thing that drew you here today from your residents is what every community needs to do. And I don't know what that was in particular, but that's the kinds of things that need to be available in the community to integrate people that live in those cookie cutter places with the larger community. And again, don't take me the wrong way, but in some ways the housing industry is responsible for sort of helping people define what they need, if you know what I mean. I'm 75. I probably should move into this place or something like that. So in other words, we sort of let commerce and marketing make these decisions for us, rather than being aware of the potential of a wider range of options that we can select. But unfortunately, those options aren't all that available these days. And I think really that's what the group here is trying to do, is to try to reimagine, what the options could be for people. And I think we need as many options as possible. My orientation towards housing policy would be that we want to sort of do it all. We want to provide as much choice as we can. And that's really, I have to say, is kind of an American consumerist way of thinking about things also, but maybe for a good reason. Because you go to the grocery store, you got all these choices, right? Well, we want to do the same thing for housing. Maybe it's naive, I don't know. But a good question. Any other responses to that question?
Kind of.
Yeah.
Just from a healthcare perspective, I think, independent living probably has more options, but the healthcare system and the healthcare policies also are part of the problem, or the contributing to the models that we have in place today. So as healthcare shifts, that's also going to perhaps create more opportunities, because healthcare is going to have to behave differently, and so they're going to be looking to innovative models to address these changes.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of the healthcare system is driven by risk management and liability, and the senior housing industry too, to some degree. And this is where older people in our communities can provide some leadership in demanding to have more risk in their lives. It's okay for us to take a chance or walk a little too far and need to have somebody pick us up or whatever. Those are sort of the way natural communities work. So we need a slightly higher tolerance of risk, I think. And I'm sure there are countervailing forces, obviously, because nobody wants to get sued. But I think that's one of the obstacles. Yeah.
Yeah. What about populations that typically have had very little choice because of socioeconomic reasons. Do you see any interesting models that address housing needs for older adults that are low income or particularly landlocked because of maybe historically segregation?
Yes, no, it's really an excellent point, particularly in, not only in urban areas, but in rural areas too.
Can you
Sometimes.
repeat the question for us?
Oh, I'm sorry. What are the options for people with low income? And what are we doing to address those needs? And there's a sense that maybe there aren't as many options for those people. And I think that's true. Certainly it's true. And it's a problem not only in urban areas, but in rural areas. You know, you go through a lot of small towns and you see kind of on the edge of town a bunch of garden apartments where the seniors live. But you can't really walk downtown. There may not be a downtown left to walk to. So there are not a lot of options for lower income people in rural areas either. I don't know that we can expect the private market to solve all those problems just by nature of the way things work. So we have to talk about ways to subsidize those choices. And I think there is some interest in HUD, Housing and Urban Development, to begin. There's a conversation going on there that I think is important. In Indiana, our state housing authority is putting more money, less money into new construction and more money into home rehabilitation, home modification for older people. So shifting some of the way we spend resources is important. HUD is part of the Sustainable Communities Initiative. And so the HUD at the federal level and Department of Transportation, it's EPA, I think, have kind of a three-way partnership, and now the Administration on Aging, or what used to be called the AOA, is involved. And they're beginning to talk together about what makes a community sustainable. But their audience, you know, are lower income people around the country. So
have you
this
seen
decides a
any
whole bunch of
particular
any particular projects?
Yeah, that seems promising.
There's a really cool project in Brooklyn. This is the first one that comes to mind, which is grandparent housing, and it's for low income, mostly African American women who are grandparents caring for grandchildren, and it's specialized housing. It's a beautiful place, and on the first floor they have child care and after school programs. So if a grandma needs respite, you know, she's got a child care program. And there's a support group there on site for women who are grandparenting. And that, I don't know, that's one of the first comes to mind.
I just want to ask Forrest, you've been a new resident, and what's your experience been so far in terms of expectations and delivery of services, what you thought you're getting into and where you are so far?
Yeah, actually, I'm working on a review of my experience for the year, going on a year and a half. I went into it without any clear expectations. My wife has some significant challenges, was a major reason we went into it. And I'm pretty together. And what I find is that I'm one of the few people there who are. And I find it very frustrating. I feel like I'm confined. I'm in like a quasi prison, I guess. I mean, there are services that can be brought in that people are using, but I feel like the population generally is isolated from the community, and the staff, as well intended as they are not able to respond to efforts to connect with the larger community. For example, the election is coming up, and there is no discernible interest on the part of staff to facilitate the residents' involvement in the political process. This was back in the fall as well as now. So there's no discernible effort on the part of staff to engage residents in the process of planning for the life of that program. You know, they refer to it as family, and that is becomes so superficial given the nature of the experience. I can't even think of it as community. It is a facility.
Warehouse.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's how I experience it. And I don't mean to be overly critical, because I really do believe they're doing the best they can. Part of what I experience too is staff have, as far as I can tell, no discernible preparation in terms of working with the diversity of the aging population. There is what I discovered recently, and looking at the Lifespan Institute material, there is a dumbing down kind of effect. There is child speak, or whatever, elder speak, what it's called. I feel like a pawn on a chessboard, literally. That helps.
Yeah, that's, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. It's really insightful and useful to a group like this. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate the invitation.